In the peaceful suburbs of Los Angeles, among meticulously landscaped lawns and spacious homes, lives the Miller family, who at first glance seem to embody the American dream. Jason Miller, a 37-year-old successful entrepreneur, has built a thriving tech company from the ground up. His business, Miller Tech, has become one of the leading software firms on the West Coast, earning him millions of dollars and a reputation as one of the brightest minds in the industry. Jason is frequently mentioned in local news outlets as a symbol of hard work and perseverance. His neighbors see him as a role model, someone who has made it to the top through grit and determination. His employees respect him, and his peers admire him for his achievements. In the eyes of the community, Jason is the epitome of success. Yet behind the facade of his seemingly perfect life, there are cracks. Jason's dedication to his business has come at a steep personal cost. The long hours, endless business trips, and constant pressure to expand his company have distanced him from his family. What was once a close and loving relationship with his wife, Sarah, has gradually deteriorated into something far more fragile and strained. Jason's focus on work has caused him to become emotionally absent at home, leaving Sarah to carry the burden of raising their 4-year-old daughter, Emma, mostly on her own. Sarah Miller, now 34, is Jason's high school sweetheart. They married young, with big dreams and promises of a happy life together. In the early years, their marriage was strong, filled with love, adventure, and mutual support. Sarah had aspirations of her own. She once dreamed of becoming an architect, but after Emma was born, she gave up her career to become a full-time mother. Jason had promised her that it would only be for a few years, just until the company got off the ground. But as the business grew, so did Jason's responsibilities. What was supposed to be a temporary pause in Sarah's life turned into a permanent one. Sarah's days became a monotonous routine of taking care of Emma, maintaining their immaculate home, and playing the role of the supportive wife at Jason's company events. Although they lived in a beautiful house with every material comfort, Sarah felt increasingly isolated. She missed the vibrant, ambitious woman she used to be before motherhood and Jason's career consumed her life. The sparkling social circles they once belonged to felt hollow to her now, filled with superficial conversations that only reminded her of how much her life had changed. The fulfillment she had hoped to find in raising their daughter had been replaced by a gnawing sense of dissatisfaction. Jason, meanwhile, had become consumed by his work. What began as a passion project to secure their future had grown into an obsession. His workdays were long, and even when he was at home, he was often glued to his laptop or on calls late into the night. The intimacy they once shared vanished as Jason's focus shifted entirely to his business. Sarah tried to be understanding at first, reminding herself that Jason was working hard for their family's future, but over time, her patience wore thin. She felt abandoned, not just emotionally but physically as well. Jason's frequent business trips left her feeling like a single mother, alone in a house that felt far too big for just her and Emma. Despite her feelings of loneliness, Sarah tried to keep up appearances. To the outside world, she was the perfect suburban wife devoted to her family, attending neighborhood events and volunteering at Emma's preschool. People often told her how lucky she was to have such a successful husband and a beautiful family. But inside, Sarah was struggling. She missed the excitement and passion that used to fill her life, and she began to resent Jason for what she saw as his neglect. In quiet moments, she found herself wondering if this was the life she had really wanted. Jason, oblivious to his wife's growing frustration, believed everything was fine. He saw the material comfort he provided as evidence that their life together was a success. In his mind, his hard work justified the long hours and time spent away from home. He assumed that Sarah understood, and that once the company reached the next level, he would finally have the time to be the husband and father he used to be. But he had no idea how deeply Sarah's resentment had festered, or how desperate she was becoming for something, anything that would make her feel alive again. By the time we meet the Millers, the cracks in their marriage are widening. What was once an enviable life is now little more than a carefully constructed facade. Sarah is a woman on the edge, longing for the attention and affection that her husband no longer gives her. And Jason, blinded by his pursuit of success, doesn't realize that his perfect world is on the verge of collapse. Beneath the surface of their picturesque suburban life, something far darker is about to unfold, something that will shatter their world forever. Feeling increasingly isolated in her own life, Sarah Miller decides to make a change. It starts small. She begins taking better care of herself, returning to hobbies and routines she had long since abandoned. One of those changes is joining a nearby fitness club. While it may seem like a simple decision, it will soon set in motion a chain of events that will forever alter the course of her life. Sarah doesn't realize it at the time, but this decision is born out of more than just a desire to stay healthy. It's a search for something deeper, a sense of purpose, validation, and perhaps even escape. The fitness club Sarah joins is an upscale establishment, frequented by the wealthy residents of their affluent neighborhood. It's the kind of place where people not only come to work out but also to see and be seen. At first, Sarah feels awkward and out of place. She's surrounded by people who seem to have their lives perfectly together, women with perfect bodies, designer workout gear, and a confidence that only highlights the insecurities Sarah feels in herself. Still, she pushes forward, hoping that regaining control over her body will help her regain control over her life. It is at this gym that Sarah first meets Josh Carter, a personal trainer in his late 20s. Josh is everything Jason is not: young, energetic, and attentive. He's charismatic and immediately takes an interest in Sarah, offering her workout advice and encouragement. Sarah notices his athletic build, sun-kissed skin, and confident smile. He's not just handsome, he's charming in a way that draws people in effortlessly. The attention Josh gives Sarah is intoxicating, especially for a woman who has felt invisible in her own home for so long. Their initial interactions are innocent enough. Josh is simply doing his job as a personal trainer, motivating Sarah, showing her how to use the gym equipment, complimenting her progress. But there's an underlying current of attraction that Sarah finds hard to ignore. Unlike Jason, who is always preoccupied with work, Josh makes Sarah feel seen, heard, and most importantly, desired. Each time they talk, there's an unmistakable spark between them, one that Sarah hasn't felt in years. At first, she dismisses it as harmless flirtation, something that gives her a fleeting sense of excitement in an otherwise dull routine. But as the weeks go by, that flirtation grows into something more. Josh starts paying extra attention to Sarah during her sessions, offering to help her with new workouts and staying late to chat after the gym clears out. The conversations become more personal. Josh talks about his life, how he's trying to figure out his future, and how much he enjoys working with clients like Sarah. Sarah, in turn, opens up about her frustrations at home, though she stops short of outright criticizing Jason. She tells Josh how hard it is to juggle being a mother and the wife of a man who is never around. Josh listens intently, offering comfort and validation in a way that Jason never does. Josh's attentiveness slowly starts to blur the lines for Sarah. What was once just a professional relationship now carries an undeniable tension, one charged with the possibility of something forbidden. Josh isn't just listening anymore, he's flirting. His compliments become more direct, more suggestive. He tells Sarah how great she looks after her workouts, how impressive her dedication is, and how someone like her deserves to be treated better. Sarah soaks it in, each comment feeding a growing sense of desire that she hasn't felt in years. One day, after a particularly intense workout session, Sarah and Josh find themselves alone in the gym after hours. The other patrons have left, and the dim lighting creates an intimate atmosphere. As they talk, the conversation takes a more serious turn. Josh leans in closer, his voice soft as he compliments Sarah, not just on her physical fitness but on her beauty. His hand briefly touches hers, a lingering gesture that sends a rush of excitement through her. It's been years since Sarah has felt this way, and in that moment, something inside her shifts. As they continue talking, the line between trainer and client blurs further. Josh suggests they grab a drink sometime just to unwind outside of the gym. It's an innocent enough suggestion, but the implication is clear. They both know it's not just about having a drink. For a brief moment, Sarah hesitates. She knows what crossing that line would mean. She's a wife, a mother, and by all accounts, still in a marriage. But at that moment, all the loneliness and neglect she's felt for so long overwhelms her. The temptation is too strong to resist. She agrees. The next night, Sarah and Josh meet at a small, out-of-the-way bar, far from the prying eyes of their upscale neighborhood. The atmosphere is casual, but the tension between them is palpable. They talk over drinks, and the conversation flows effortlessly, as if they've known each other for years. Josh is charming, funny, and attentive in a way that makes Sarah feel young again, like the version of herself she lost somewhere along the way. She finds herself laughing more than she has in months, maybe even years, and for the first time in a long time, she feels truly alive. After a few drinks, the inevitable happens. They share their first kiss. It's a moment of passion and release, a forbidden connection that ignites something inside both of them. The kiss is intense, charged with all the unspoken feelings that have been building up over the past few weeks. Sarah knows it's wrong, knows that this is the moment where she's truly betraying Jason, but she can't bring herself to stop. The excitement, the thrill of being wanted again, is too powerful to resist. From that night on, their affair takes off. Sarah and Josh begin meeting in secret, their relationship growing more passionate with each encounter. They find ways to sneak around, meeting at parks late at night, booking hotel rooms during the day, and occasionally visiting Josh's modest apartment on the outskirts of town. Each meeting is more intense than the last, and with every stolen moment, Sarah falls deeper into the affair. She feels alive again in a way she hasn't felt since she was young, free from the suffocating routine of her life with Jason. However, as their affair intensifies, so do Sarah's feelings of guilt. Every time she returns home to Jason and Emma, she's reminded of the life she's betraying. She loves Emma dearly, and despite her frustrations with Jason, there's still a part of her that cares for him too. But her desire for Josh is like an addiction, one she can't seem to break free from. It's only a matter of time before this double life she's leading spirals out of control. What started as a simple attempt to find herself again has now turned into something far more dangerous. As Sarah's affair with Josh intensifies, her behavior at home begins to change noticeably. She becomes more distant and withdrawn, spending less time with Jason and Emma. Her once regular attendance at family dinners, social gatherings, and events in their affluent neighborhood dwindles. Instead, Sarah claims she's going to the gym more often, or out with friends, excuses that Jason initially doesn't question. But gradually, Jason starts to notice subtle but troubling changes. Jason, always preoccupied with work, had long taken Sarah's presence for granted. He knew she was unhappy with the long hours he spent at the office, but he had convinced himself that it was temporary, that as soon as his business stabilized, he'd have more time for her and their family. He often thought Sarah's frustration was simply due to the stresses of motherhood and suburban life, things that he believed could be smoothed over with time. He didn't see any reason to worry, and he dismissed their occasional arguments as part of the normal ebb and flow of marriage. But lately, Sarah's absence became more pronounced, and Jason could no longer ignore it. She had started going to the gym almost daily, claiming that she needed time for herself, but her trips were getting longer and more frequent. Her phone became a near constant companion, with messages coming in late at night or during family time, which she would quickly brush off as texts from friends. Though Jason wanted to trust her, something about her demeanor didn't feel right. When he asked her about her late nights or why she was so often out with friends, Sarah would answer quickly and defensively, her explanations becoming increasingly vague. One night, while lying in bed after Sarah had gone to sleep, Jason's mind wandered to the growing distance between them. He stared at the ceiling, replaying the last few months in his head, piecing together the subtle changes in her routine. Was it really just a renewed interest in fitness, or was something else going on? As his thoughts churned, Jason reached over for Sarah's phone on the nightstand. He hesitated for a moment, knowing this would cross a line, but his instincts overrode his better judgment. Unlocking her phone with trembling hands, Jason scrolled through her messages, half expecting to find nothing out of the ordinary. But then a particular thread caught his eye, one labeled Josh Trainer. His stomach tightened as he opened the chat. The messages were harmless at first, brief conversations about workout routines, scheduling, and encouragement. But as Jason scrolled further back, the tone of the messages shifted. The exchanges became more personal, filled with inside jokes, flirty remarks, and compliments that crossed the boundaries of a professional relationship. His heart sank as he read lines like "I miss you" and "can't wait to see you tomorrow," followed by emojis that left no room for doubt. The pieces started to fall into place. Jason didn't confront Sarah immediately. He spent the next few days in a daze, trying to wrap his mind around what he had discovered. Every time he saw Sarah, holding Emma or moving through the house, he felt a rising mixture of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. The realization that his wife, the woman he had loved and trusted for years, was seeing another man filled him with a sense of helpless rage. How long had this been going on? Had she ever truly loved him, or was their whole marriage a lie? Jason's first instinct was to confront Sarah that night, to demand answers and hold her accountable for the betrayal. But something stopped him. He wasn't ready to face the full weight of what that confrontation would mean. Instead, Jason decided to gather more information. Over the next few weeks, he began paying closer attention to Sarah's movements, her body language, and her habits. He started checking her phone more frequently when she wasn't looking, monitoring her gym schedule, and noting the times when she would disappear for hours without any real explanation. At the same time, Jason's resentment towards Sarah grew. He found himself watching her closely, looking for any signs of guilt or remorse. But Sarah remained oblivious to his suspicions, continuing to act as though nothing was wrong, which only made Jason's anger intensify. It wasn't just the affair that hurt him, it was her complete detachment from their life together. The woman he once knew had become a stranger, and every time she smiled or pretended that everything was fine, it felt like another knife to the heart. The turning point came one night when Sarah came home later than usual from the gym. Jason had been sitting in his office, pretending to work, but his mind was entirely consumed by thoughts of Sarah and Josh. When she finally walked through the door, Jason felt the flood of anger he had been suppressing rise to the surface. He couldn't hold it in any longer. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence of the house. Sarah, clearly caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before answering, "At the gym. I told you I'd be late." "The gym closed hours ago," Jason replied, his voice low but trembling with barely contained rage. "I checked the schedule." For a brief moment Sarah froze, the weight of the lie hanging in the air between them. Jason watched her face closely, looking for any sign of regret or confession, but instead she doubled down on her story. "You're being paranoid," she said, her voice wavering but firm. "Just because you're not around doesn't mean I'm doing anything wrong." Jason's fists clenched at her words, his frustration boiling over. "I know you're lying, Sarah. I've seen the messages. I know about Josh." The room fell into a suffocating silence. Sarah's face went pale, her eyes wide as she realized the depth of Jason's knowledge. For the first time, the reality of her affair was laid bare, and there was no going back. "You've been cheating on me," Jason said, his voice cold and filled with disbelief. "How could you do this? After everything we built together, how could you destroy it like this?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she struggled to find words, but none came. Instead, she turned away from Jason, retreating to their bedroom without another word. Jason stood there, his world crashing down around him, feeling more alone than ever before. In the days that followed, the tension between Jason and Sarah was unbearable. They barely spoke, and when they did, it was brief, curt, and filled with resentment. Jason considered confronting Josh directly, but deep down he knew that wouldn't fix anything. The damage had already been done, and now Jason was left to figure out what came next. Divorce? Separation? Jason was torn between his anger and his desire to hold his family together for Emma's sake. But what Jason didn't know was that Sarah's guilt wasn't enough to stop the affair. In fact, her encounter with Jason only deepened her resolve to stay with Josh. She rationalized that if Jason had truly loved her, he would have noticed her loneliness long before the affair. In her mind, she was the victim of Jason's neglect, and Josh was the one who made her feel alive again. This dangerous justification would soon lead Sarah down a darker, irreversible path, one that would have deadly consequences for them all. After the explosive confrontation with Jason, Sarah finds herself consumed with conflicting emotions. She feels trapped between two worlds: her crumbling marriage with Jason, who now knows about her affair, and her passionate, but illicit, relationship with Josh. The argument with Jason had left her shaken, but it also ignited a deep resentment within her. She blames Jason for everything: his absence, his lack of attention, and the years she spent feeling invisible. In her mind, she convinces herself that Jason is the true villain, that his neglect pushed her into the arms of another man. This self-justification becomes the foundation for a darker, more dangerous idea that slowly begins to fester in her mind. It's during one of her secret rendezvous with Josh that the thought first surfaces. They are lying in bed in a cheap motel room, the excitement of their affair fading into the quiet of the late afternoon. Josh, noticing Sarah's distant mood, asks her what's wrong. At first, Sarah is hesitant to speak. She knows the thoughts running through her mind are extreme, even dangerous. But the tension in her life has reached a boiling point, and the idea seems to offer a twisted sense of relief. In a moment of frustration, Sarah says something she's been thinking about but never dared to voice. "I wish he wasn't in the picture anymore," Sarah mutters, staring blankly at the ceiling. Josh turns his head toward her, unsure if he heard correctly. "What do you mean?" he asks, his voice cautious. I mean, if Jason were gone, we could be together. No more sneaking around, no more lies. Just you and me." Her voice is steady, almost too calm for the gravity of what she's suggesting. Josh's heart skips a beat. He laughs nervously, hoping that Sarah is just venting. "You don't really mean that," he says, trying to dismiss her words as frustration. But Sarah doesn't laugh. Instead, she turns to face him, her expression serious, her eyes cold. "Why not?" she asks. "If he's out of the way, we can have a life together. I wouldn't have to keep pretending. I'm tired of living like this." Josh sits up, now fully realizing the direction the conversation is heading. His initial reaction is one of fear. The idea of killing Jason is not something he ever imagined when he started the affair. He thought it was just a fling, something to fill the time and satisfy his ego. But now Sarah is talking about murder, and the stakes have become much higher than he ever intended. "Sarah, you're not serious," Josh says, his voice shaking slightly. "This is crazy. You can't just kill him." Sarah sighs, sensing his hesitation. She softens her tone, trying a different approach. "I'm not saying we go out and do it tomorrow," she says. "But think about it. I can't divorce him. He'll take Emma, and I'll lose everything. He'll make sure I'm left with nothing. But if something happened to him, an accident maybe, or something that looked like a robbery, no one would ever suspect us." Josh is horrified by the suggestion. "An accident? Robbery? This is insane, Sarah. We can't do that. I can't do that." But Sarah, driven by desperation and a warped sense of logic, won't let the idea go. Over the next few weeks, she starts to bring it up more and more during their meetings. What started as a passing comment becomes a fully formed plan in her mind. She paints Jason as the enemy, convincing Josh that her life with him is unbearable, and that Jason is controlling and emotionally abusive. Sarah manipulates the narrative, framing herself as a victim, and Josh, already emotionally invested in her, begins to feel trapped. He doesn't want to lose her, but the thought of committing murder terrifies him. Sarah's persistence wears down Josh's defenses. She tells him that if they don't do something, they'll never be together. She plays on his emotions, feeding into his fears that she will stay with Jason if things don't change. The more Josh resists, the more Sarah pushes, twisting the situation until Josh begins to feel that there is no other way out. He's not a violent man by nature, but his attachment to Sarah has blinded him to the severity of what they are planning. Eventually, Josh, though still reluctant, agrees to help her. But the guilt and fear continue to weigh heavily on him. He can't sleep at night, his mind constantly racing with thoughts of what they're about to do. Every time he sees Jason's name on Sarah's phone, he feels a stab of panic, knowing that soon, this man's life will be over because of him. Together, Sarah and Josh start to outline a plan. Sarah suggests staging a home invasion. The idea is simple. While she and Emma are visiting her mother, Josh would break into the house, kill Jason, and make it look like a robbery gone wrong. Sarah carefully orchestrates the details: when Jason will be home, how Josh should enter the house, what to steal to make it look authentic. She even goes so far as to map out an alibi for herself, making sure that she will be miles away with Emma when it all happens. In her mind, the plan is foolproof. Josh, still terrified, tries to rationalize his role in the plan. He tells himself that he's doing it for Sarah, that she truly needs him, that this is the only way they can have a future together. But deep down, he knows that once they cross this line, there's no going back. Every fiber of his being screams that this is wrong, but the power of Sarah's manipulation and his infatuation with her are stronger than his instincts. The date is set July 21st, 1997. Sarah tells Jason that she and Emma will be spending the evening with her mother, leaving the house empty for Josh to carry out the murder. As the day approaches, Josh's anxiety reaches a breaking point. He starts to have second thoughts, but every time he tries to back out, Sarah pulls him back in, reminding him of what they're doing this for their future. On the evening of July 21st, everything is in place. Sarah leaves the house with Emma, giving Jason a kiss on the cheek and telling him she'll be back late. Jason, unaware of what's coming, returns to his work in his home office. Hours later, Josh pulls up outside the Miller house, his heart pounding in his chest. He sits in his car, staring at the darkened windows, knowing that inside is the man he's about to kill. But as the moment draws closer, the weight of what he's about to do overwhelms him. Josh picks up his phone and calls Sarah, his voice trembling. "I can't do this," he says, panic seeping into his words. "I can't go through with it." Sarah, furious, immediately drives back to the house to confront Josh, knowing they've come too far to turn back now. On the night of July 21st, 1997, the weight of the murder plot finally comes crashing down on Josh. He sits in his car, parked a few houses down from the Miller's home, drenched in sweat and gripped by fear. His heart races, and every nerve in his body screams at him to leave, to walk away from this insane plan. He stares at the house, knowing Jason is inside, unaware that his life is hanging by a thread. But the reality of what he's about to do is too much for him to handle. Trembling, Josh dials Sarah's number, hoping that she'll understand, that she'll let him walk away. "I can't do this," Josh says, his voice shaking. "This is wrong. We can't do this." On the other end of the line, Sarah, who has already driven to her mother's house with Emma, feels a surge of panic and anger. Everything has been set in motion. She knows that if Josh backs out now, they'll never have another chance. She drives back to the neighborhood, her mind racing with frustration and fury. When she arrives, she finds Josh still sitting in his car, paralyzed with indecision. She storms up to him, her face a mask of cold determination. "Get inside," Sarah hisses through clenched teeth. "We've come too far to stop now. You think we can just walk away from this? Do you want him to find out and ruin everything?" Josh, overwhelmed and unable to fight back against Sarah's pressure, reluctantly follows her into the house. As they enter, the air is thick with tension. The house is dark except for the faint light coming from Jason's office, where he is working late, as usual. He's completely unaware that his wife and her lover are standing just a few feet away, plotting his death. Sarah motions for Josh to stay back as she moves toward Jason's office. Her mind is racing, her heart pounding in her chest. She knows this is at the moment everything will change. Jason, hearing footsteps, looks up from his desk, surprised to see Sarah back so soon. "What are you doing here?" Jason asks, his voice filled with suspicion. "I thought you were with your mother." Sarah doesn't answer right away. The tension between them is palpable, the unresolved argument from the night before still lingering in the air. Jason stands up, confusion turning to frustration as he tries to understand why Sarah is acting so strangely. But before he can say anything more, Sarah's anger boils over. "Do you even realize what you've done to me?" she snaps, her voice rising with years of pent-up resentment. "You've ignored me, neglected me, and now you accuse me of things without even trying to understand why I did what I did." Jason, taken aback by the intensity of her outburst, tries to respond. "I know about the affair, Sarah. I'm not blind. How could you do this to us? To our family?" But before Jason can finish, Sarah's rage reaches its breaking point. She grabs a kitchen knife from the nearby counter, her hand shaking as she points it at Jason. At first, it's more of a threat than an actual attempt to harm him, but the moment escalates quickly. Jason, shocked by the sight of the knife, instinctively tries to defend himself, and in the chaos that follows, Sarah's anger overtakes her. She stabs Jason first once, then again, each thrust fueled by years of frustration, resentment, and the weight of her crumbling life. Jason gasps in pain, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief as he collapses to the floor, blood pooling around him. The realization of what she's done hits Sarah like a freight train, but there's no time for regret. Jason is dying, and there's no going back now. Josh, who has been standing frozen in horror at the doorway, finally snaps into action. He rushes over to Jason's body, his hands trembling as he tries to process what just happened. It's too late. Jason is barely conscious, his breath shallow and labored. Josh looks at Sarah, his face pale, filled with panic. "What have we done?" he whispers, his voice barely audible over the sound of Jason's gasping breaths. But Sarah, cold and calculating now, is already thinking ahead. "We have to make it look like a robbery," she says, her voice eerily calm. "Help me." Together they drag Jason's body into the office, tying him to a chair to make it appear as though he had been overpowered by an intruder. They ransack the house, knocking over furniture, scattering papers, and pulling out drawers to create the illusion of a robbery gone wrong. Sarah meticulously wipes down the surfaces in the kitchen and office, erasing any fingerprints that might connect her or Josh to the scene. She disposes of the knife in a nearby dumpster, making sure no trace of the murder weapon can be found. By the time they're done, it's past midnight. Jason's body sits slumped in the chair, blood staining the office floor, while the rest of the house looks like the aftermath of a violent break-in. Josh is visibly shaken, his hands trembling as he tries to process what they've just done. Sarah, on the other hand, is disturbingly composed. She feels no guilt, no remorse, only a sense of cold satisfaction that her problems have finally been solved. She believes that they've covered their tracks well enough to avoid suspicion. As Sarah and Josh leave the house, they reassure themselves that they've done everything right, that the staged scene will fool the police and everyone else. But what they don't realize is that they've made several crucial mistakes that will soon come back to haunt them. The following morning, Tom Bradley, the miller's neighbor, notices something strange. Jason's car is still in the driveway, though he usually leaves for work early. Concerned, Tom walks over to the house and notices the front door is slightly ajar. His stomach sinks, a sense of dread washing over him. He knocks on the door, but there's no answer. Pushing the door open, Tom steps inside, calling out for Jason or Sarah. When he gets no response, he ventures further into the house, and that's when he sees it: the ransacked living room, the broken furniture, and then, in Jason's office, the horror that awaits him. Jason's body is tied to a chair, his head slumped forward, and blood is splattered across the floor and walls. The room looks as though it had been violently searched, but something feels wrong to Tom. His hands shake as he fumbles for his phone and dials 911, his voice trembling as he tells the operator what he's found. Within minutes, the Los Angeles Police Department arrives at the scene, and it isn't long before they realize that this isn't the robbery it was meant to look like. Jason's wallet, watch, and expensive electronics are all untouched. There are no signs of forced entry. As Detective Lisa Coleman surveys the scene, she knows right away that something is off. This wasn't a robbery, she mutters to her partner, Detective Tom Harris, as she examines Jason's body. This was personal. As the police begin their investigation into Jason Miller's death, the staged robbery quickly starts to fall apart. Detective Lisa Coleman, a seasoned investigator with a sharp eye for detail, immediately suspects that this wasn't a typical break-in. Despite the disarray in the house, nothing of significant value has been taken. Jason's wallet and watch are still in place, and the electronics remain untouched. But the most telling sign is the lack of forced entry. Whoever did this, Jason must have known them. The detectives start by interviewing Sarah, who plays the part of the grieving widow to perfection. When they arrive at her mother's house, Sarah is in tears, clutching Emma in her arms. She tells them how she was visiting her mother with her daughter that night, and how she had no idea what was happening back home. She paints Jason as a hard-working, loving husband and claims to have no enemies that could want to hurt him. But as Detective Coleman listens, she notices something off about Sarah's story. It feels too rehearsed, too polished, as though she's reciting lines she prepared beforehand. Meanwhile, the forensic team begins uncovering small but crucial pieces of evidence at the scene. A partial fingerprint on the chair where Jason was tied, blood stains in the kitchen that suggest the initial attack happened there, and inconsistencies in the way the house was ransacked all point to something much more personal. The detectives quickly rule out a random robbery and begin focusing on those closest to Jason, namely Sarah and anyone she might have been involved with. As the investigation deepens, the detectives uncover a key piece of information: Sarah's affair with Josh Carter. When Josh is brought in for questioning, his alibi is shaky. He claims he was at home the night of the murder, but his phone records tell a different story, placing him near the Miller house that evening. Faced with this evidence, and under mounting pressure from the detectives, Josh starts to crack. In a moment of desperation, Josh confesses that he had helped Sarah stage the crime scene. But he insists that it was Sarah who killed Jason in a fit of rage. It was all her idea, he tells the detectives, his voice trembling. "I didn't want to do it, but she wouldn't let me back out. She was the one who stabbed him. I just helped her clean it up." Josh's confession gives the detectives what they need to make their case against Sarah, but there's one final twist. The partial fingerprint found on the chair doesn't belong to Sarah or Josh, it belongs to Laura Green, Sarah's best friend. The revelation shocks the investigation team, but as they dig deeper, they uncover the truth: Laura had been secretly in love with Sarah for years. When she learned about Sarah's affair with Josh, her jealousy turned into rage. When confronted with the evidence, Laura breaks down and confesses everything. She had helped Sarah and Josh stage the scene, but in her blind loyalty and obsession with Sarah, she had taken it one step further. She was the one who delivered the final, fatal stab to Jason, believing that once he was out of the picture, she and Sarah could finally be together. In the end, all three, Sarah, Josh, and Laura, are arrested and put on trial for their roles in Jason's murder. Sarah and Laura are convicted of first-degree murder, while Josh is sentenced for being an accessory to the crime. The once perfect image of the Miller family is shattered, leaving behind a trail of betrayal, obsession, and violence. As the dust settles, their daughter Emma, now an orphan, is placed in the care of her grandparents, destined to grow up with the dark legacy of her parents' choices hanging over her.